This is the third video in the series, How to Build an Engine in the card game Dominion. And this video will focus on the first of the four key engine components, which is draw. To begin with, we'll define some terms. A draw card is just any card that increases your hand size. That's really what you're trying to achieve when you're drawing cards. And if, for example, you have 5 cards in hand and you play a card, and then as a result of resolving its effect, you have 6 or more cards, that card would classify as a draw card. This is not equivalent to just any card that says +1 card, +2 cards, etc. in its text. Some cards might say +1, +2, +3 cards, and still not qualify as draw cards. Some cards might not say plus card on them at all, and still be classified as draw. We'll discuss some more concrete examples in a minute of what those cards look like. Secondly is stop cards. A stop card is any card that draws no cards at all. So for example, treasure cards. Copper, silver, gold, playing them does not draw you cards. Victory cards, province, duchy, estate, playing them doesn't draw you cards. You can't play them at all. And many action cards even, cards like moneylender, remodel, mount a bank, militia, they don't draw you any cards. And so all of those count as stop cards. And then finally, cantrip is just any card that says +1 card, +1 action on it. You'll see this pretty commonly in a lot of Dominion cards. A very simple common theme is +1 card, +1 action, and then some third effect. And hopefully by the end of the series you'll understand why that's a common theme. But just know for now, those cards are called cantrips. The term itself comes from Magic the Gathering, which I believe itself borrowed the term from Dungeons & Dragons. It's not important to know the etymology. There's no cantrip. There's a card that says +1 card, +1 action on it. So now let's talk about a few key principles of draw. The first is, you should treat every card in your deck as having an implicit -1 card on it. And that's because you have to go through your entire deck multiple times in a game of Dominion. And each time you do that, every card in your deck is going to have to get drawn. And so if a card is not proactively drawing you cards, what it is doing is taking up space. For example, take a card that just does nothing, like the card Estate. Has no effect, doesn't get played, it just counts for 1 point at the end of the game. If I have an Estate somewhere in my deck, at some point in my next few turns, and drawing my 5-card hand, one of those cards is going to be the Estate. The Estate will take up a spot in my hand that could have been filled by a more productive card. I spent one of my 5 draws for that turn drawing that Estate into hand. And so if the card is not productively contributing, it is actively undermining the quality of your deck, because you have to draw it whether it's doing anything for you or not. And so based on that simple principle, every card, because they take up space in your deck and have to be drawn into hand, functionally is -1 card. And so based on that fact, what you'll find is that to build an engine, which again, the aim is to draw your entire deck, you'll need to have at least 1 draw for every stop card in your deck. A stop card, again, is any card that doesn't draw. We just said any card that's not drawing is taking up space. It's like functionally -1 card. So if you wanted to break even, if you wanted to find all the cards in your deck, you'll need at least 1 extra draw for every one of those stop cards, which makes sense. You have to draw it somewhere. The card's not drawing itself. And so you'll find that those 2 numbers need to balance. A cantrip, it counts for 0. We said that every card has an implicit -1 card. A cantrip has +1 card on it, and so it breaks even. A card like Market or Merchant, if you play it, it took up a space in your hand, so you had a 5-card hand that had Market in it. You play the Market, you're down to 4, it draws you 1, you're back to 5. And so you're neither larger nor smaller in hand size than you were before. So cantrips count neither for nor against the draw part of your deck. They don't draw you cards in the relevant sense, but they also don't take up space that would require you to draw cards. So what you'll see is that a lot of the cards are stop cards, some cards are draw cards, and cantrips are neutral. So if you subtract out the cantrips, you'll need enough of those draw cards to find all of your stop cards. Otherwise, you won't be able to draw your entire deck. And so now, in the next segment, I'll give a demonstration of that. All right, here we have an example of a kingdom. Not necessarily the most realistic kingdom or game state, but it will help demonstrate some of the points we were just discussing. I've already played through a few of the turns to get to this game state, and these are the cards currently in my deck. So I got 9 merchants, 9 groundskeepers, just 1 highway. We have a single highway, 9 markets, and a grand market. And we also have a chapel and a silver. So looking at this deck, how much draw does it have? How many stop cards does it have? And I guess how many cantrips does it have? We can start there because most of these cards are actually cantrips. Merchant, +1 card, +1 action, little effect. Groundskeeper, same thing. Highway, +1 card, +1 action, simple effect. Market, +1 card, +1 action, 2 little effects. Same thing with Grand Market. And so all these cards, these 29 total cards, are cantrips. And we said those are all draw neutral because they're an implicitly -1 and they also draw 1. So the vast majority of this deck is cantrips. What are the last two? Chapel, it's a stop card. It doesn't draw any cards at all. Silver, also a stop card. Silver doesn't draw any cards. So this deck has no draw cards, 29 cantrips, and 2 stop cards. So then the question is, if we were to play this turn, can this deck draw its entire deck? If I wanted to play this as an engine, would I be able to see all the cards in this turn? And the answer to that is yes, because although there's no draw cards, you always start the game with 5 draw. Each turn, you draw 5 cards in your hand. And so the baseline is you have 5 draw to start with, and I only have 2 stop cards, so I do have the capacity to draw my deck. If I play this out, I have 5 cards. Each of these cards, when I play it, I end up with a 5-card hand still, because I played the card and drew a new card. So these are all breaking even. And there's only 2 cards in my deck for which that will not be true, the silver and the chapel. So if I find the chapel, well, this particular line has stopped drawing. Let's continue with the rest of the cards, and I know every other card in here has at least +1 card on it. So each card will find the next card, which finds the next card until I'm done. And so I can draw through the entire deck. And so say I've done that. Now I'm trying to decide, all right, it's my buy phase. How many cards can I add to this deck? Well, I could add as many cantrips as I want, and it would not influence my ability to draw the deck at all, right? If I feel like it, I could add a Grand Market or 2, and these all say +1 card on them, so they're not increasing the number of stop cards in my deck. I don't need any more draw to be able to draw those because they're draw neutral. But let's say I want to add some stop cards, like I want to score some points. I've got these groundskeepers that give me points if I buy victory cards, and I want to buy a few of those. I have 2 stop cards and I have 5 draw power. So for example, I just bought 2 duchies and score 9 points off of that per duchy. I now have 4 stop cards in my deck. I have the silver, the chapel, and the 2 duchies. So if I were to end my buy phase here and play the next turn, I still have 5 draw and only 4 stop cards. So I should still be able to play through this turn. We'll see each of these draws a new card. And of these 5, at some point, 4 of these are going to terminate in a stop card, hence the name stop card. But then I'll always have at least 1 card left to continue drawing. So I've got all 4 stop cards in hand. I know these last 4 cards are all some card here that has +1 action, or sorry, +1 card on it. And so I know they'll draw each other until I'm at the bottom. And so I'll draw my deck again. Now, if I want to keep reliably drawing, I could, for example, trash these duchies. I still got the point from buying them with Groundskeeper, and I could buy, say, 2 more duchies or 2 provinces, 2 estates, and then I've reached a steady state in my deck. This engine could just continuously play itself. Buy 2 cards, trash 2 cards, get 9 points per card I bought, and you've got a nice self-sustaining engine there. Now let's say I get a little bit greedier and I buy 3 duchies. So I've now got 5 stop cards in my deck. And that's exactly as much draw as I have. So theoretically, I should be able to draw my whole deck, but that's not guaranteed. And what you'll notice is that number we're discussing, where the number of draw cards has equal to the number of stop cards, that's not the number of cards that guarantees you draw your deck. That's the minimum number of cards that you need to make it possible to draw your deck at all. If the cards are all played in the right order, and you find all of your draw cards, then a deck that has draw equal to the number of stop cards will draw its step. But you'll sometimes have a problem where you don't find all your draw cards in time. So for example here, I have 1 card left. That's some draw card, or I don't know exactly which one it is. But you have this problem sometimes where maybe you find 5 stop cards and then your deck stops there before you found all the draw. And so there are other cards, we'll see in later videos, that can help you improve the reliability of your deck to play the cards in the right order. But just note that having draw cards equal to your number of stop cards is the bare minimum to make it possible to draw your deck. It's not the number that guarantees it. For example, let's say this chapel were on the bottom. Let's say all 5 of these cards were on the bottom. I could draw my entire deck, right? All these would draw each other, that would draw, and then I would end up with these 5 in hand. Now let's say these 5 are on the very top of my deck, right? Say this was my starting hand. My turn would end immediately, right? I wouldn't draw any of my cards. And so while This deck, in theory, can draw itself if I play all these cards before getting to these cards. It's not guaranteed, and so sometimes you might fail to draw your deck, even if you have enough draw to make it, in theory, possible, because you played the cards in the wrong order, or you drew the cards in the wrong order. And so sometimes those are inevitable, sometimes there's ways to play around it. Just note that this formula is just telling you the bare minimum to draw your deck, not the maximum that guarantees it. And now let's say, well, really not in my action phase yet. Let's say I were to trash these duchies. Let's say I get even a little bit greedier. Let's say I were to buy 4 cards. So I buy 4 estates. So now I have 6 top cards: Chapel, Silver, and 4 estates. Now if I were to play out my next turn, I know without the shadow of a doubt I will not draw all my cards. There's just no conceivable way. I have 6 stop cards, and there's no way to get 6 stop cards in the hand when I only have 5 draw power in my deck. And so, whereas when we had 5 draw and 5 stop cards, I could conceivably draw every single card if I ended in the right order. There's no way this deck, given this composition, could ever draw all of its cards, just because at some point you'll end up with 5 of your stop cards in your hand, a 6th one will still be in your deck, and then perhaps even some number of other cards. And so hopefully this demonstrates the basic idea of that formula is you'll have some number of stop cards, and when you reach them you stop, and if you want to overcome that you'll need additional draw. So now let's look at a few examples of cards that do and do not count as draw. We said at the outset what we're looking for is a card that can increase your hand size. So if you have X cards in hand and you play a card, you resolve its effect, you want to end up with more than X cards in hand. And so we'll look at which cards do and do not do that. For starters, we have Market. We saw this one in the last example. It does say plus card on it. And so you might be tempted to think adding a Market to your deck gives you the ability to draw cards. And I think the last demonstration hopefully shows why that's not the case. Market's just a cantrip. It only breaks even. Because every card is an implicit -1, and Market says +1, you end up with exactly as many cards as you had before. A 5-card hand with Market, you play the Market, you go down to 4 because Market leaves your hand, you draw a card, you're back up to 5. You're exactly as large a hand as you were before you had the Market. In that last example, we saw a deck that had over 30 cantrip cards that all had +1 card, +1 action on them, ended up only drawing 5 cards in its deck because those cantrips were only draw neutral. And so Market does not count as a draw card, nor would cards of this general type. Now what does count as a draw card? Let's look at a few of the quintessential examples of draw cards from the base set. Laboratory is a draw card. It says +2 cards, +1 action. So if we do our little mental subtraction, Laboratory is an implicit -1, just like every card, because you have to get the Laboratory into your hand. You subtract 1, you're left with +1 card. So Laboratory is on net 1 draw. And if you think about that in context, that'll work out. Imagine a hand with 5 cards, one of which is Laboratory. You play the Laboratory, your hand will go down to 4 cards because Laboratory left it. You resolve the effect, you draw 2 cards, your hand's now up to 6 cards. You had a hand that was 5 cards, it went to 6 cards. Laboratory drew you on net 1 card. And so if you want to think about draw power, Laboratory is +1. A deck without a lab could see 5 stop cards. A deck with a lab could see 6 stop cards in its hand. Smithy, here's another card, +3 cards. Smithy is net +2 draw. We do our little mental subtraction. It takes up a spot in our deck, but it draws 3 cards. It is netting us 2 draw. So Smithy would help you draw 2 additional stop cards in your deck. Moat is a third example from the base set. It's just +2 cards, much like Laboratory, that is +1 draw. Now you might notice the theme so far, which is this card, or all those cards that we saw a second ago that had +1 card of them, they didn't count as draw. Market, for example. And these cards that have +2 or more, they seem to all count as draw. So maybe the threshold for draw is just saying +2 or more. And that starts to get the right idea, but it's not exactly accurate. Here's a few examples where that might go awry. Take, for example, Forum. Forum says +3 cards on it, and it says +1 action. So you might think that it's twice as strong as Laboratory. You're getting net +2 cards. But the question, again, we want to ask fundamentally is, if I play this card, is my hand size increasing? So if you think about what happens when you play a Forum, you have a 5-card hand with Forum in it, you play it, you're down to 4, you draw 3 cards up to 7, But then there's this last part of Forum's effect, which is discard 2 cards. So I take that 7-card hand, I discard 2 cards, I'm back down to 5, where I started. So Forum is not a draw card. It only breaks even like Laboratory does. I could have 10 Fora in my deck, and before playing this Fora, after playing this Fora, I would still have 5 cards. The amount of cards in my hand would not change. So while Forum does have a function, it can help you sift through your deck to find the cards you want in the right order. It can resolve problems of finding the wrong cards out of order. It cannot, on its own, draw you cards. No matter how many you have, you'll end up with the same hand size. Another example, Young Witch. Young Witch says plus 2 cards on it, but it also says discard 2 cards. So in this case, we're going to have a similar problem to Forum, but it's going to be even more stark. A 5-card hand with Young Witch, you play the Young Witch, you're down to 4, you draw 2 cards, you're up to 6, now you discard 2 cards, you're down to 4 now. Young Witch is not only not draw, you're actually decreasing your hand size each time you play it. One play of Young Witch will reduce your hand size by 1 on net. And so Young Witch isn't even as good as Market. It's not even breaking even. And so if you tried to build a deck where you use Young Witch for the plus 2 card draw effect, thinking you could get your hand size bigger and bigger by playing a bunch, what you'd find is your hand size is actually getting smaller over time. So Young Witch is definitively not draw. Third example, here from the base set again, Cellar. Cellar is going to have a similar problem as Young Witch or Forum if you're trying to use it for draw. You can discard any number of cards and draw that many. So you can theoretically draw huge numbers of cards with Cellar. Imagine I have a card that, a hand that's already got 15 cards in it. And I discard, so I play the Cellar as one of those cards, and I discard the other 14. Cellar is drawing me 14 cards. Now, does that make it a draw card? No, because my hand size did not increase. I had a 15-card hand, I played Cellar, and I replaced 14 cards with 14 new cards. My hand size is actually now 1 smaller than before, much like Young Witch. The Cellar is not only not drawing me cards, it is not even breaking even. So Cellar is certainly not a draw card. One last example of cards in this basket would be Spice Merchant. Spice Merchant, again, says plus 2 cards and plus 1 action as one of the options you can choose. But even if you choose that option, Spice Merchant is not a draw card. It cannot increase your hand size. And that's because to get Spice Merchant's effect, you're having to trash a treasure from your hand. So if you have a 5-card hand that's got Spice Merchant, a copper, and 3 other things, you play the Spice Merchant, it leaves your hand. You trash the copper, it leaves your hand. You're down to 3. You draw 2 cards, you're back to 5. So Spice Merchant's breaking even. It's like Forum. It's like Forum or Market. Spice Merchant is neither increasing nor decreasing your hand size, assuming you choose this effect. If you choose the other effect of plus 2 coins, it's decreasing your hand size. So all these cards, despite saying, plus 2 cards, plus 3 cards, plus any number of cards, none of these function as draw. None of them can increase the size of your hand, which is what you want to do in an engine. Now let's look at a converse example, a card that doesn't say plus 1 card on the text itself, but actually can function as a draw card. Here we have a card from the new expansion called Paddock. Paddock says plus 2 coins, gain 2 horses, plus 1 action per empty supply pile. Nothing on this looks like draw. But the part we want to hone in on here is this middle part. Gain 2 horses. What's the horse? Well, here's a horse. Horse says plus 2 card, plus 1 action, and then when you play it, it goes back to the pile. So you're getting to do the horse effect once, and then it removes itself from your deck. Plus 2 card and plus 1 action we've seen, that's what Laboratory does. And we already said Laboratory counts as 1 draw in your deck. So if you get a horse in your deck, that's 1 draw for that shuffle, and the horse goes away. So Paddock, each time you shuffle through your deck, you play your Paddock, you're adding 2 horses, and each of those horses counts as plus 1 draw. So the effect of playing Paddock is to get 2 draw. Paddock itself, like every other card, is -1. Paddock is net 1 draw. It has the same overall draw power as a card like Moat, or a card like Laboratory. And Paddock is drawing you 2 cards. It's a delayed effect though, right? You play Paddock this shuffle, you're adding 2 draw to your next shuffle. And so you're not getting the draw the turn you play it, but if you think about the engine playing its whole deck each turn, you play 10 Paddocks, you get 20 horses. Those horses are giving you 20 draw that can draw up those Paddocks again next turn, and then draw up 10 other cards. So 10 Paddocks is netting you 10 draw. And it's going to be a delayed effect. It's not going to happen the first time you play it, but the effect of getting 2 horses will on net make Paddock a draw card. And so you could build a kingdom in which Paddock was your primary source of draw. And then we'll cover a few other examples that start to get into different types of draw. So here we have library, another card from the base set. This card is variable amount of draw. You draw until you have 7 cards in your hand, which is going to be a different amount of draw depending on how many cards you already have in your hand. So is library a draw card or not? And the answer is yes, library is draw as long as you can make sure your hand size is less than 7. Supposing you had 7 cards in your hand and you played library. Your hand goes down to 6 because library left, and you draw back up to 7. So from a 7-card hand, library would only break even. It'd be in that category like market or forum, it's draw neutral. Imagine you had 10 cards in your hand. You play library, you're down to 9, it draws nothing, you already passed 7. So if you have a big hand, library is drawing you no cards at all. But what about if you had your standard 5-card hand and you play a library from a 5-card hand? How much does library draw? What are these cards is it equivalent to? Think about that for a second and then I'll give you the answer. So imagine you have a library and a 5-card hand and you want to play it. How much draw is it giving you relative to these other cards? All right, the answer. Library from a 5-card hand would be giving you +2 draw equivalent to Smithy, right? If you look at Smithy from a 5-card hand, Smithy means you go down to 4 because Smithy leaves your hand and you drop to 3, you end up at 7. You've gone from 5 to 7, Smithy's +2 draw. Same happens with the library. From a 5-card hand, library leaves your hand, you draw up till 7. Library would count as +3 draw. Oh, sorry, I misspoke, +2 draw. So library from your average starting hand is drawing you as much as a Smithy is. And so you can build a deck around cards like library, where they're your primary draw. It's just you'll need the ability to get cards out of your deck again after you resolve their effects. So for example, there's some cards like Moat, not Moat, my mind is going the wrong places. There's some cards like Mill. Mill's effect is if you discard 2 cards of the Mill, you get 2 coins. You could build a deck around library and Mill where, for example, you drew up to 7 cards and you discard some cards of the Mill to get your hand size back down below 7, and you drew up again with a new library, and so on and so forth, until you'd resolved all the cards that you wanted to use, and you could get a bunch of money off of Mill. And so you could build a deck around library in which you drew all the cards using this effect. However, some of these variable draw cards, you'll hear the term draw to X for cards like this, they require sort of a different kingdom than a normal card, because like you can't draw, say, 10 golds with library. You're going to max out at 7 cards. And so these cards only work with stop cards that can leave your deck mid-turn, which will not be all of them. And we'll go into more detail on this in a later video. Just note that situationally, cards like library can function as draw. It just requires that your hand be lower than 7 cards, otherwise it's not really net drawing you cards. And so they function as draw in decks where you can reliably reduce your hand size again. Another example being Scholar. Scholar, discard your hand, draw 7 cards. That's going to net draw you cards if the hand that you're discarding was smaller than 7. And then lastly, there's other non-cards in the game Dominion that can also give you draw. For example, these events. Pathfinding lets you put a +1 card token on any action supply pile, and then every card in that pile will give you an extra draw when you play it. So if I bought Pathfinding, which costs 8, I could choose to put a + card token on Market, and it would go from +1 card to +2 cards. Market would now be a draw card. It would be functional equivalent in draw to Laboratory. Or if I bought Pathfinding, I could put it on Laboratory and go to +3 cards. Laboratory would now be at +2 cards. So Pathfinding is real strong, that's why it costs so much. It can turn an entire stack of cards in the kingdom into draw cards when they weren't before. Expedition, this just draws your cards directly. It's like one-time draw. When you buy it, you pay 3, you get 2 cards. Expedition is draw. It's kind of costly, so you don't want to draw your deck just by buying a billion expeditions each turn to draw your entire deck next turn. That require a whole lot of money. I've seen kingdoms that do that, but it's exceptionally rare. This is just like a little bonus draw you might want to add if you had some extra money sitting around. So that's some examples of what cards do and do not count as draw. And now I'll give one last example of a kingdom to hopefully show that point. All right, let's take a look at one more kingdom to put those principles we discussed together. This is another one that's been constructed. I've already played through a bit to achieve this starting deck. So we've got 4 villages, 3 smithies, 4 laboratories, 5 market squares, 5 fora, and 12 golds. And we want to know how much draw power does this deck have? How many stop cards does it have? Let's take a look. So village, +1 draw, this one's draw neutral. So village does not count 4 against our overall ability to draw. Smithy is net plus 2 cards because it's plus 3 minus that implicit 1. So each smithy is worth 2 draw. Laboratory, we already said each laboratory is 1 when we looked at the laboratory a second ago. So each laboratory gets us 1 draw. Market Square, this card is a cantrip, much like Market, and so this card is, again, draw neutral. Forum, we saw this one can be deceiving. It says plus 3 cards and plus 1 action, so it might look like it's stronger than Laboratory, but it also forces you to discard 2 cards. And so this effect on net makes our deck draw neutral. And then lastly, Gold. Gold's a stop card. Gold does not draw you any cards, and so this is an example of a card that is just simply -1 card. So we look at our deck as a whole, we see there's 12 stop cards in the deck. We have 12 golds. And then we have 6 draw from our 3 smithies. We have 4 more draw from our labs, that's 10 draw, plus the initial 5 draw, which is that you draw 5 cards at the start of every turn. So our deck has the ability to draw up to a 15 card hand, and we only have 12 stop cards that need to be in the hand at the end of the turn. So this deck should be able to draw the entire deck with 3 spare draw left over. Now notice, I think we discussed this before, this is not the number of draw that guarantees you'll draw your deck every turn. This is just the minimum number of draw you need to guarantee that if the cards are played in the right order, you will draw your deck. It's always possible, for example, to get a hand that's just 5 golds. And that's your starting hand. Doesn't matter how much draw is elsewhere in your deck, you won't draw your entire deck. And so it is often the case that you can't ever bring the chance you draw your deck to 100% certainty. Having draw equivalent to the number of stop cards is just the minimum you need to have any degree of chance. And cards like Forum, although they don't draw you cards on net, we'll see in a second when we try to draw our deck, can actually be helpful because Forum is draw neutral, but it helps you sift through your cards to play them in the right order. So if you have a deck that has the capacity to draw itself, and you're worried about the likelihood of finding the cards in the right order to do that, you can add cards like Forum that will help you find those cards that you need, the draw cards, so you can draw through your entire deck and not get stuck with cards that are needed on bottom. So let's see if our prediction's right. We can draw through the entire deck. Laboratory. We play a few of these cantrips, break even, draw more, draw. And so yeah, here we got a spot where we have just a bunch of golds, but we have some fora. And so we can play the fora, discard those golds. We obviously want the golds, right? The end goal is to get the golds, but we don't need them now because they're not doing anything for us. They're stop cards, they're just getting in the way. So let's discard them down to the discard pile and find more of the draw cards. And if we did our calculations correctly, if we can get to all of our draw cards, we'll have enough draw power to find all the cards in our deck. And here, we got it. We got all 12 golds with 3 draw left over. Remember, these are draw neutral, and so theoretically, we should be able to draw 3 more than we did. And so here's an example of how this calculation is relevant. Let's say I wanted to add some more cards to my deck this turn. Maybe some banks. This looks really good, right? It's worth 1 per treasure we have, and we've got 12 gold already. So let's say I wanted to add a few banks to my deck, and I still want the ability to draw my entire deck. How many banks can I add? Well, I could add 3 banks. And let's say I wanted to add a 4th bank and still draw my deck. If I add this 4th bank to my deck, there is absolutely no way I can draw my entire deck the following turn, because I have 15 draw, and I would have 12 golds and 4 banks to draw, which is 16 cards. And so I would know there'd be at least 1 card left over. So if I add a bank, what I'll have to do is add at least 1 more draw. So for example, laboratory, that's 1 draw. I can add a lab. And now, this deck should be able to draw itself exactly if we play through it. Let's find out. And there we go. We drew through our deck exactly. That last lab drew our last 2 golds. And so now I play this, and I've got, oh boy, that's a lot of money. So I could easily buy, 6 provinces. Now I'm kind of wishing I had more plus buy, but that's for another episode. So this is an example of how understanding the amount of draw versus stop cards can help. It's often influential in your decision to buy cards If you have the idea that your deck is overdrawing, that it has excess draw capacity, you know you can add extra stop cards to get yourself more payload. If you know that you're underdrawing, you need to add more draw cards. And if you find that you're just breaking even, like right now, if I wanted to add more payload, like more banks, I would have to add extra draw cards equivalent to that. And so understanding how much draw each card nets you, how much draw a stop card requires, will help you make sure your deck stays well balanced. And so this is one of those things that will help you run your engine more smoothly, is making sure you constantly have a nice balance between draw cards and stop cards. It doesn't need to always be exact. Sometimes you can afford to overdraw or underdraw a little bit, but you want to have a general sense of this, because a deck that's overdrawing is likely under payloaded. You spent too much of your money on draw, and you're not getting as much out of it as you could. And a deck that's underdrawing is also under payloaded, not because you have too little payload, because you're not finding all of your payload. And so in general, you want to make sure you have a good balance between draw and stop cards. In the next video, we'll talk about actions and how to understand the concept of action in Dominion.